welcome to my channel. I am excited. This is the 8th lecture that I'm giving, and finally, we're going to start talking about Jewish dates, and of course, the dates about Jesus Christ. Christian dates as well. In the last 7 episodes, we have figured out the mystery of the Roman censuses. Solved. After 2,000 years, nobody knew how to do it. I show you how to do it. It's not rocket science. It requires reading comprehension, to read what people are telling you about how the Romans made sequences of numbers. And we have worked out all the censuses, including census that started on 1 AD and completed on 2 AD, which is the census of the birth of Jesus Christ. And those are all backed up by astronomical events. So there's no uncertainty, there's no guesswork, there is no best approximation. No, these are certain. Same thing with the 15th year of Tiberius. We know exactly when it happened, and we know with certainty. It's backed up by numerous eclipses, especially lunar eclipse on the 1st of Tiberius. So there's no problem there. One thing that came out of the investigation was that the Roman canons, which are supposed to be the Roman new moon, was when the moon was completely dark. And they also call it the lunar conjunction. And not when a day later or 2 days later you see a slight sliver of light and you call it, oh, that's a new moon. That's when it starts appearing, the first sighting. That's not how the Romans did it. We know that Julius Caesar's assassination, it occurred on the Ides of March, which is the 15th of March, which on the Julian calendar will be March 23rd minus 43. So here's March 23rd minus 42, sorry, which is 43 BC. You can barely see it, but there's a shadow that comes across the moon, and that's the umbral eclipse. Stellarium doesn't show it all that well, but March 23rd was the 15th of their lunar calendar. So we count back 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You can't see it because it's below the earth at that time. Hold on a second. Remove the ground. Yeah, there we go. The moon is completely dark. And then he even tells you what the percent illumination is. 0.3% when a waxing crescent. This is the lunar conjunction. So from the assassination of Julius Caesar, we know that they used a lunar calendar. Now, the other verification that we have, the other way we know this, is because there was a calendar written in 354 AD. And it's called the 354, the chronograph of 354. And in it, I showed it to you before, so you should have a link to it. It tells you that in year 354, the 1st of January was a Saturday, and the 1st of January was the 22nd of the moon. So if we go to 354 on our calendar, January 1st, in Rome. Here's Rome. Oh, the time's still ticking. Okay. And then we said around just after it got dark. I believe the Romans took their measurements at sunset. That would be Saturday, which is correct. This is a Saturday. And they're claiming this is the 22nd of the moon. Now they wrote it on 354, so I could just see the moon. I mean, it's not calculated or anything. This is an actual measurement they did, observation they did. So if that's the 22nd, this will be the 21st and the 20th, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Completely dark. So we have determined that unlike what people think, and people thought centuries later, that the moon is not when you see the first sliver of the moon. Like that would be somewhere around here a few days later when you see the first sliver of light. No. They did it on the calendar was the completely dark moon. The question is, how did the Jewish do it? The records what we have from the Talmud and everything else tells us that the Jewish from the Temple of Jerusalem at the time of Christ had an observational calendar, and not as they do now a Jesus Christ. Not as they do now a fixed calendar. Right now they do it by calculation, but back then they did it by observation. And they observed the moment that they could see a sliver of light, and they called that the new moon. But reading about how to measure the moon, we have a book written by Al-Biruni, a Arab historian, and he tells us that where is it? Yeah, he has a whole section on determination of the new moon. And he tells us the Jewish were divided into two sects. One were the Rabbinites, which obviously are the rabbis from the Temple of Jerusalem. And he says here, now they do the calculations, blah, blah, blah. And I'll read it later, but he says the other sect was, the second sect was which he calls the Miladites, who derive the beginning of the month from the conjunction, which is really interesting. So that means that there were two sects, even in the year 1000 AD, they were still doing it in two different ways. By the same as the Romans, by the lunar conjunction, and by observation. Now this is a really interesting write-up. So let's read it. I put it here so we can read it better. Regarding their knowledge of the beginning of the month and the mode in which it is computed and used, the Jews are divided into two sects. One, which are the Rabbinites, which are the rabbis from Jerusalem, and the second are the Miladites, who derive the beginning of the month from the conjunction. They're also called the Al-Qurra, or the Ashma'iyya, or the Ananites, and also the Karaites. So Um, and these guys, all these guys, rejected the rabbi oral Torah or oral law, and in that way they were very similar to the Sadducees. Um, so they were in opposition to the rabbis in Jerusalem. But listen to this. This is really funny. Um, they derived the beginning of the month by means of a calculation from the mean motions of two luminaries, sun and moon, no regard being had as to whether the moon is visible already or not. For it was their object to have a conventional time that was to begin from the conjunction of the sun and the moon. But that's not what they are. I'll show you. By the following accident, they were, as they relate themselves, induced to adopt the system. So, Al-Biruni is talking about they were forced to do a fixed calendar from calculation because they posted guards up on the tops of the mountain to observe the new moon. And when they see the new moon, the sliver of light, they ordered them to light up a fire and to make smoke, which was a signal for them that the new moon, in fact, had been seen. So they had these towers all over the nation of Israel, going all the way to Babylon, because there is a huge Jewish colony in Babylon. So every few hundred miles, or whatever miles, there's a tower. And when they decided, okay, today is going to be the new moon, they lighted up the tower, and the person really far away on the next tower could see the light and light up his tower. In that way, they could communicate very long distances and say, today's the day, right? Now, on account of the enmity which existed between them and the Samaritans, these later went and set up the smoke from the mountains, sent up the smoke from the mountain one day before the new moon was seen. So they're saying, oh, those horrible Samaritans, they're lighting up the fire one day before the new moon is seen. So from that, right away the Samaritans had a system where the new moon was from the conjunction, when it was completely dark. And then next day, you see the little sliver of light. This practice they continued during several months, at the beginnings of which they always happened to be clouded. Finally, the people in Jerusalem found out this, observing the new moon on the third and fourth of the months, rose above the horizon on the east, blah, blah, blah. And so it was evident that the Samaritans had deceived them. Therefore, they had recourse to the scholars of the time in order to be protected by a system of calculation against the deceitful practices of their enemies. The problem is that, as far as I can tell, the Samaritans were doing it correctly. From the Old Testament, the way they did it is on the completely dark moon. And it was the newcomers that came back from Babylon that brought in with them the names of the calendars from Babylon, the way of calculating the new moon from the Babylon, which was different than what the original Jews did. So it was the rabbis that were wrong. I'll have to show that many videos from now. But the end result is that you can't have an eclipse of a new moon because their new moon is a day past, or 2 days past. The second sect are the Miladites, who observe the beginning of the month from the conjunction, which is when it's completely dark. Now, how does this relate to Jesus and Christianity? Well, this solves the problem of the Last Supper. People wonder, what was the Last Supper? The Last Supper was a feast that Jesus Christ did in the afternoon, after it got dark, for which he had wanted a lamb. They had wine, they shared the wine, they shared unleavened bread. So it was a Paschal feast. He was celebrating the Passover a day early. Why would he do that? The reason is that Jesus Christ was calculating the beginning of the month from the lunar conjunction and not from the first time it is seen. We'll have to talk more about that in a moment. Now, there's a great site called Sepharia.org. Now, the Jewish people had the Torah, which are the 5 books of Moses, which are written. And then for several centuries, they had oral law, which was laws and customs that they were supposed to follow, passed from teacher to student, but they were written down. They were kind of, in a way, they were kind of secret. and that created a rift between the society. The Sadducees said, hey, we follow what's written on the Bible. And the Pharisees said, no, you're heretics because you're supposed to follow our teachings that we came up by ourselves. I mean, there were lawyers coming up with new rules which have, you could say they were tied to the Bible because they were supposed to be following it, but they came up with them. They were brand new rules. So that created a rift in society. But 200 years later, some of them wrote them down. 500 years later, some other people wrote them down. And they form the Talmud and the Mishnah and several other large collections of rules and judgments, basically, for various situations. They're all collected now. It's being digitized. They're all collected now in a site called Sepharia.org, which is really interesting. So we can go to that, say Sepharia.org, and he has, like I say, has the Tanakh, the Mishnah, the Talmud, various texts, the Halakha, and the interesting things, they tell us how they used to measure the moon back during the temple period. So if we do a search for the new moon, it comes up with several, various documents. One interesting one is the Mishnah Rosh Hashanah 2:2. And it gives you the Jewish version and then translation. Now, here they're talking about how they observe the moon. For example, here they say, one who has seen the new moon but is unable to walk must be mounted on an ass or carried by others on the bed. It's kind of interesting. That's how important it was that somebody see the new moon. Here they're talking about the same situation that Al-Biruni talked about. At first, bonfires were lighted on tops of the mountains to transmit the appearance of the new moon, but when the Cutheans, which are that's how they call the Samaritans, corrupted the process, he was ordained a messenger should be sent out. How were these mountain fires lighted? They brought long staves of cedar wood and shoots and sticks from oil trees and the scraps of flax, which they were all tied up on top of the staves with twine. With these, the court agent went to the top of the mountain and lighted the fire, and waved them to and fro, upward and downward, until he could see his fellow, and that later was doing the same on the top of the next mountain. And so too, on top of the third mountain. And from where did they light these fires, mountain fires? From the Mount of Olives to Startava, from Startava to Grofina, until he could see the whole diaspora in front of him like a torch of fire. Pretty far away. And then basically you needed two witnesses to say, hey, we saw the new moon. What I mean by they saw is that the moon had gone completely dark, and then a day or two later, a very little sliver of light could be seen. And it could not be seen by anybody. They needed two witnesses. So, how were the witnesses examined? The pair that came first were examined first. The judge would bring the eldest of them and say to him, how do you see the moon? Was it with the crescent turned toward the sun, away from the sun, to the north, to the south? What was its elevation? Towards which side was it inclining? How wide it was? So they really examined them. Afterward, they would bring the second witness and examine him. If their words were found to match and their testimony stood, uh, then all the other pairs of witnesses would be asked as well. And then the head of the court would say, the new moon is consecrated, and all the people answer him, consecrated, consecrated. So there you have it. That's how the Jewish people record in their ancient texts how the moon was sighted. You need two witnesses that could have seen just the first sliver of the moon. So now we know how the priests of the Temple of Jerusalem calculated their new moon. But the question is, how did Samaritans do it? Both the Talmud and the writings of Al-Biruni says the Samaritans did it by the lunar conjunction. They did it the day before the sliver of light could be seen. And you're thinking, well, how would they know? How could they predict that? Actually, there's a very simple way. It's just look at the moon as it's waning, getting small. The light's getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and then just wait until light can be seen no more, and then that's the day. So it's not that complicated. The question is, how did they do it? Can we confirm that? And it was amazing to me to find out that the Samaritans still exist. They haven't died out completely. They're on the verge of extinction. There are only 800 Samaritans left in the world, which is really sad because apparently they contain some of the traditions and knowledge that even predates the rabbinical Jews. So, if we make a search for the Samaritans, it says that the population in Israel is 460 people, and the population in the West Bank is 380 people. So, a total of 900 people in 2024. That's it. But they do have several religious books. They do keep their traditions. They do keep their Passover. And the Passover is different than the Jewish Passover. They celebrate the Passover and they celebrate their dates, sometimes in different months because they intercalate in different times, and sometimes, most of the time, on different days. They have kept their calculations secret. They never disclose them. As their website tells us, they use now a computer program to calculate it for them, based on their secret calculations. And we can find out when did they did the Passover. Let me see if I can find their site. They have their own site. Feast of Tabernacles, Gerizim, Passover. and they published the Passover on one of these dates. Oh, this is not the site I'm looking for. So these are the Samaritans that are left in Israel. Only 900 people. It's amazing. Yeah, this is the one that I remember seeing. We go to the festival dates. Doesn't seem to be working. Oh, here we go. And he tells us that the Passover sacrifice was done Wednesday at sunset. So this is after sunset on the 6th of May of 2020. Now we know when the Samaritans did their Passover. So we go 6th of May 2020. In May 6th. May 6th. It was right after it got dark. So this is the 15th of the month. The day of preparation is Passover is the 14th. At sunset, it becomes the 15th, and then they eat on the 15th. So if this is the 15th, then day earlier will be the 14th, 13th, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 2, 1. Perfectly dark. So this confirms, so this, this means that the tradition of the Samaritans has been kept faithfully for over 2,000 years. It's incredible. And this demonstrates that there were two ways of doing it. Now, if you look at a map of Israel and Judea, let's see if we find a good one. There we go. So here's Judea, and here's where Jerusalem is. Here's Samaria, that has a completely different calendar. Not only the months sometimes are intercalated differently, but the dates start differently. And then there's Galilee on top over here. Why would you expect the Galileans to have the same calendar as Judea when Samaria is in between? It just doesn't make any sense. What happens is the people from the Temple of Jerusalem were taken, and then they were exiled to Babylon. They stayed there 70 years, and then they came back. Now, the people of Galilee and Samaria stay there. All the time, there was continuous settlement of the Galileans and the Samaritans. Now, what the big beef or contention between the Judeans and the Samaritans is that all the Babylonians also brought colonists from Cuthea in Babylon, and they settled in Samaria, and they intermarried with the population. That does not mean that all the population intermarried. Some of the population remained, and those were the Jewish Samaritans. And I don't know what happened with Galilee, but they didn't seem to have as big a problem as Judea, so I assume there was no big colonization effort on Galilee. So it stands to reason that both Galilee and Samaria would retain older ways of calculating the calendar, calculating the new moon, and the people are returned to Judea and resettled and rebuilt the Temple of Jerusalem, brought with them the new calendar. Um, so that explains that. So there are two methods of doing it. The Samaritan and Galilean method and the Judean method. And since Jesus Christ was a Galilean and most of his followers Galilean, they followed the lunar conjunction method. Now that we have determined there are two different ways of calculating the new moon, you realize that it would stagger the dates for the festivities. And this explains the Last Supper. Jesus Christ went ahead and asked his disciples for a lamb. And we can see it here on Luke 22, verse 7. Then came the day of unleavened bread, in which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and make preparations for us to eat the Passover." "Where do you want us to prepare it?" they asked. He replied, "As you enter the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him to the house that he enters. And say to the owner of the house, 'The teacher asks, where is the guest room where I might eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large room upstairs, all furnished. Make preparations there." So they reclined at the table. They ate the Passover meal. They broke the bread. And Jesus Christ says, "This is my body given to you. Do this in remembrance of me." They drank wine. "The cup is the new covenant of my blood, which is poured out for you." And then it wasn't until that night that he was captured by the guards. Judas betrayed him. And the next day he was crucified, though we know it was Friday. So the Last Supper was on Thursday, and it's explicitly called a Passover meal. How is that possible? We can explain it by the staggering of dates, as I'll show you in a moment. So, as you can see here, for example, this is the month of Nisan, in which Jesus Christ was crucified, the lunar month of Nisan. If the month of Nisan started on the first day when the lunar conjunction happened, when the moon was fully dark, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever. And then on the 14th, that would be Thursday. Oops, let me make an extra column here. Day of week. So this is Friday. This would be Thursday. So on the 14th, which is Thursday, at night, it becomes the 15th, and they eat the Passover if the month is defined from the lunar conjunction. If the month is defined from the first sliver of light, it starts on here on the 1st, and then the Passover, when they eat the Passover, will be on the night of Friday, the next day. And this is what happened during the crucifixion and the Last Supper. And as we'll see as we go through the various episodes and lectures and get corroboration, this is in fact what happened. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is that for the Jewish people, the day, what they call the 24-hour unit of the day, started at sunset, which is very strange. Well, not as strange as ours. Our day starts on midnight. Why would it start at midnight? It's just as strange. But for the ancient Jews, the day started at sunset, and that's because on Genesis, God said the night was pre-existing, and then God said, "Let there be light." Let's see if we can find that. Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. So the day starts in the evening, and then comes morning, and that is the first day. So for the Jews, the day starts at sunset. And that's why, let's see, let's do another explanation here. Hold a second. Alright, I created this little chart. For example, for us, Monday begins at midnight. When you think about it, it's kind of strange. And then run through the night until sunrise, and then you have the day, and then you go to sunset around 6 p.m. and then continues through the night, and then you have the end of Monday. But for the Jews, the day began at sunset. So the day had begun already, the sunset the prior day, so that was Monday. But then, while it's still Monday for us, it's already Tuesday for the Jews. They switch at sunset. So, and this is important to realize, important to know, because, for example, of the gospel writers, you have Mark, you have Matthew, you have John, and then you have Luke. Luke was the only person that was not a Jew. He was a Greek physician. And he didn't quite understand this. As you'll read from his accounts, he got confused a few times as to when the day started and the day ended. So far we talked about what's a Jewish day, in that it starts at sunset. So it goes from dark to day, and then the day ends, and then it starts again at night, and it goes through the day. We talked about the Jewish lunar month, how it starts and when it starts. Starts on a new moon, but what is a new moon? There are two different ways of doing it. One was the lunar conjunction, when it's completely dark. One is the sliver of light, which is the way the rabbis at the Temple of Jerusalem did it. Then we need to talk about the Hebrew months. And to add to the confusion, there were two ways of calculating the Hebrew year. They typically had a sequence of 12 months. The original Hebrew names are lost. These names were taken from the Babylonians when they returned. I think Nisan used to be called Abib, but they don't know anymore what the names was. So the lunar month lasts 29 and a half days. Now, if you take it approximately, it's 29.53 or something like that. So if you take a calculator and you say if you have 29 and a half days times 12 lunar months, you end up with 354 days, not 365. And the way they got 29 and a half days is some months will be 29 days long, some months will be 30 days long, and 29, and the average would be 29 and a half. At the end of the 12 months, you're 11 days short. Minus 365. And then after 3 years, times 3, you're short 33 days. So what they did is every 3 years they would calculate an entire month, approximately. But since these months shift throughout the year, they're not fixed like our calendar. They are only approximately match our months. For example, the first month of the year, they called Nisan, which was in the spring, around the spring equinox, and that corresponds to March, April of our months. So let's fix it at March for simplicity. But I mean, the like you saw in the table from Ptolemy, the the Jewish people were conquered by multiple different cultures. First, it was the Babylonians, then the Assyrians, then the Greeks, and they all had their own calendars. As a result, there was a separate calendar that the Hebrews used to use as well, which I call the Tishri calendar, that begins in months of Tishri. And that corresponds to the fall equinox. So this will be around the spring equinox, this will be around the fall equinox. And then that year would be staggered 6 months from the Nisan year, which is staggered 3 months from our year. Now, during the time of Christ, almost everything was done with respect to the Nisan year, except the Jubilees and the sabbaticals. So the sabbatical year started on the first of Tishri. So that's something to keep in mind. And lastly, since these months are constantly shifting and you need to adjust them to come back to the to align them to the stars, how did they align them? How did they do that? It turns out that the Old Testament does not explain it explicitly, but we have the tradition that when the Christians wanted to remember Easter, which is the day that Jesus was resurrected, Sunday, there was a big argument between the priests, Christian priests. Some wanted to have a fixed date on the calendar, but some other ones argued, successfully argued, that they needed to match the way of the calculation of the Jewish people for their Passover. It needed to be aligned with the equinox. So the Passover was the Friday when he was crucified, and that turned out to be a full moon, and it's the first full moon after the vernal equinox. So they decided to call the Easter, define Easter, mouse is giving me trouble. As a movable feast instead of a fixed feast. And it was decided in the first council of Nicaea that it would be the first Sunday after the first full moon on or after the vernal equinox. And that's how you define the first of the year in the first of Nisan. There are some mentions on the Bible that of how to define the month of spring, and there's a version on Exodus that says, "Guard the months of spring and make Pesach of the Lord, make the Passover of the Lord." If spring is defined to the period after the vernal equinox, then that means that the Passover was right after spring, and if you guard the month of spring, then that means an additional month, the second Adar, will be inserted into the calendar when necessary to ensure that the holiday of Passover would always occur in the spring. So, using that information, now we can define when the year begins, when the month began, and when the days begin. And we're ready to go. Next episode, next lecture, I'll show you how to calculate exactly the date for the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Now, this date has been studied by many people, many great researchers, and they already have come up with a date. But in all of those studies, it has been, well, this is the most probable date, or this is the date that makes more sense, or this is the date that matches best the information that we have. But by following the process that I'm doing here, you'll see that this is the only date. This is known for certain, no longer the best choice. It'll be the only choice. So finally, after all this effort, we're getting into the Christian dates, into the life of and ministry of Jesus Christ, and it's going to be awesome. You'll be amazed. Some of his miracles we can determine down to the minute, or a range of minutes. In some cases, we can tell you in the hour in which it happened. Not only will we know the year, the month, the day, the hour, but the minute. It will be amazing. So I hope you stick with the program, because here we have to correct other people's mistakes, figure out why they made a mistake, and then figure out on top of that what the correct answer is, and then prove it so it's unquestionable. So we have to go step by step by step. It's, frankly, it's a little tedious and slow, but the end results will be unassailable, unchallenged, and you'll be very happy you stuck with me and with this channel. So please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.